Hello and welcome. The battle against the coronavirus is not just of medicine or public health, but also equally and inextricably is the economy and livelihoods. The linkage between the economy and public health has perhaps never been so stark. To understand how this equation is going to play out and what are the big challenges ahead in this battle against the virus, particularly on the front lines of medicine, I'm joined by Sangeeta Reddy, Joint Managing Director of Apollo Hospitals, also President of Industry Association FICCI. Sangeeta Reddy is a member of the World Economic Forum and also has graduated in hospital administration from Harvard, the National University of Singapore, and Rutgers University. Ms. Reddy, thank you very much for joining us.
It's a pleasure to be here, Govind. Despite the really difficult times we're in right now and the whole world is in, but it's finding ways for us to bond together and fight together against this dreadful situation.
Right, and that's a wonderful note to start on. Now, tell me something in a very broad sense, as we are today, a week ahead of the lockdown lifting or likely to lift. What is going back to work mean, or what should it mean?
So I think it's not a single line. The first aspect is that everybody does not go back to work. Let's be very clear about that. But this is a calibrated, well-planned lifting of the lockdown. So first is, as everybody has heard, the whole traffic light strategy. So if you're in a red zone, you're not going to go back to work or start. Everyone who can effectively work from home is going to be requested to continue to work from home. The amber and the green zones are opening. Public transport is opening, but with social distancing. Airlines will take a bit more time, but I expect in the next 10 days to 2 weeks, limited airline opening will also happen. But once you're in a factory or in an office, I think the precautions. So one is FICCI has worked extensively with industry, and Apollo Hospitals has worked also to bring out what we're calling life after lockdown. So in our detailed guide on life after lockdown, we look at it from an individual's point of view, from an operator or an owner's point of view, or the CEO and the responsibility as well as HR. So this includes strategies like, number one, grouping people. Because, for example, last week when a factory in Muzaffarnagar opened up, one person tested positive 3 days later, and the collector said shut down the whole thing. That means 400 people back out of work again. So now our recommendation is that you do clusters of 20 people in a group. So they sit together, they eat together, so that your potential containment zone or tracking zone is only 20 people. That's number one. Number two is, before people come back to work, let them know if their desk space has changed. Do alternate days so that you are reducing the number of people. Extend the working hours and definitely schedule the lunchroom. Create more cleaning facility, whether it's the tunnel or the hand wash, and definitely the temperature control. Have a sick bay in each office. So I'm not going to go through every parameter, right, but there are detailed guidelines, and these guidelines have to be followed. Not just on day one, but consistently, rigorously, meticulously for the next many months to come.
Right. Okay. And that I'm sure people will download that guideline. Slightly larger question. The link between the economy and public health has never been so strong and never required to be so strong. How does that work and how are you viewing this? I mean, it's also perhaps in some ways a philosophical question.
So, leaving the philosophy, which we will get to, because all of us have had time to think so many things about life, but just in terms of pure numbers, I think the number of areas which are in the red zone, and before it was district, but now the zones are actually shrinking, in that the size of the zone is not related to the whole district, but a 3-kilometer square radius around the difficult spot. But there is still approximately 40 to 55% of economic activity is in areas which are currently designated red zone. So over the next 2 weeks, those areas coming out clean and careful, I think, is a very important aspect of the whole strategy that we need to look at. The second aspect is that, the entire supply chain. Because if you look at things, we grow cotton in the West, we make the yarn in the South, and the stitching happens in clusters all over the country. So there's an interdependency of commercial activity which goes actually around the whole country. So while transport was very effectively kind of opened up for essential goods and food, and luckily most of our supermarkets were able to get all kinds of supplies, and agricultural produce moved and vegetables moved, and there's a lot of proactive work from the government, the police, the transport, as well as business and the farmer who reached out. But the big thing is, why will a manufacturing person open up his store if he doesn't have a retail outlet to display his product? And
Right.
the other aspect, which is very important, is who wakes up in the morning, like Suluja, who's on our FICCI committee, she said, who wakes up in the morning and decides to buy a vehicle? How are we going to re-stimulate demand? And from that comes the base question of how much can we ensure that people have jobs, people have money in their pockets, first to buy essential produce and then to come back and to stimulate demand, so that the demand and the supply engine of the economy, both which have had a considerable shock, are both reactivated at the same time or as quickly as possible.
And let me ask you a couple of questions about the healthcare sector. I mean, the healthcare sector, and I mean sector here, has almost been affected as badly by COVID as have, let's say, patients or those who are at the front lines of medicine, because economically this has been a very, very tough period for you. So, I mean, how are you seeing yourself coming out of that, whether it's your chain or your peers in the industry?
So clearly, Govind, the sector has been significantly affected, and actually we are calling it a triple whammy because number one, in the early days, patients could not come, therefore there was no revenue, and healthcare is a daily operation. The second aspect is that, like other sectors or industries did, we could not cut wages or salaries or tell people not to come to work because we need those people, doctors and nurses, etc. So none of them were ever taken off the rolls. And the third thing is that in preparation, some of us who were treating COVID had to prepare and buy kits and buy PPEs and, upgrade the number of ventilators, and all this is expensive. And now, as we begin to open, or actually we're actually at Apollo, we're pretty much open and a lot is happening, but we have to do it. The new normal in a healthcare environment is not just everyone wearing masks, but the whole cleaning protocols have grown by a factor of 10x. Anytime you do a procedure or a protocol, everybody has to wear the PPE. And that adds a cost to the whole thing. So, 500 rupee consultation, the doctor is wearing 1,000 rupee PPE. So, this is kind of the new dynamic. And yet again, we can't refuse people because, maybe the person, like I just got a message from someone, my father has acute asthma. The hospital in Mumbai is telling him, have a test, prove that you're COVID negative, and then bring him to the hospital. We can't do this. So what we said is that in all our emergency rooms, any patient can come in and we will proactively treat as if they're positive. Then we will, parallelly do the testing and make the next level of plan for the individual. And this is
Right.
taking a cost for the hospital and the patient.
Right. And I mean, a related question, as the lockdown lifts in phases, as you pointed out, the other crush that you're going to see is of people who've been waiting for treatment, which perhaps they could not come earlier, but desperately need to now. Are you seeing, are you going to be seeing a surge of patient inflow? I mean, may not be COVID, but even otherwise?
So the underlying disease will remain, and naturally people have to come. But I think the rate of individuals coming back to the hospital is directly proportionate to the mechanism of the fear lifting. So, it's not like lockdown opens up and the next day you're going to see huge lines because public are still scared. There are lots of misconceptions. The only thing we can say is that even while you're staying at home, please use teleconsult. Use the delivery mechanism and make sure you're taking your medicines. If you need to have testing, we'll send you people home to draw the blood who are safe and screened people. Don't neglect your underlying disorders, not just from the long term of your disorder, but even now for COVID, because the numbers and the statistics are showing that comorbidities increase the mortality rate. So it's very important to keep your diabetes under control. Have your heart in a good condition. Keep your immunology and your entire fitness level to the highest possible so that you can fight COVID well. So for all these reasons, using whatever mechanisms possible, we request everyone to stay fit and to stay in touch with their healthcare and their doctor.
Right. So on teleconsult, since you mentioned it, I mean, I know you started almost 20 years ago, and I mean, I'm guessing you must be doing thousands of teleconsults every day now. So have you seen a dramatic increase in that number, and do you see that rising further?
So unbelievable, fantastic adoption in teleconsults. And, this is a good thing. And this is adoption on the doctor side and the patient side. I mean, very realistically, if a doctor is super busy sitting in his consult room, he's not going to take the trouble to do the teleconsult unless he's specially, motivated or we have requested. So everybody did. And you're right, we started 20 years ago. But today, we have, millions of people on the app. We're doing thousands of teleconsults a day. And the biggest satisfaction is that our NPS levels on teleconsult are very high. And this is where our experience is showing. We're not just opening up, excuse me, this is not a COVID cough, but we're not just opening up, WhatsApp windows and saying, talk to your doctor. This is a platform that we've built over the years. It has an appropriate capture of medical data. It has a proper scheduler. It has a payment gateway. And then at the back end of it, when we're doing, the GP consults, we have what is called a clinical decision support engine. So this is proactively prompting to make sure that the doctor's interaction is of the highest quality and capability. So, I'm actually feeling like one of the good things which have come out of COVID is really digital. They say, when the winds of change are blowing, some people build walls and other people build windmills. So what India is doing is building digital. And Apollo is definitely building digital because this is our way of staying in touch. And this is not just, our app 24/7 is doing it. The areas where we support the government, in our primary healthcare, we're using teleconsult. In a project that we created called Stay-I, where we partnered with hotel chains to create isolation rooms, we have put our telemedicine on top of it so that this minimizes the number of times a medical person needs to go into the room. So once a day, the medical person goes, but 3 times a day, we're using the teleconsult on the phone for this individual to stay in touch, to feel safe. So we're using digital and technology across the board. And our eICU, which is again a program we've had for a very long time, we're now supporting nursing homes and some government hospitals in ICU. And then there's the whole aspect of tele-learning. On our e-learning platform, our first course that we created on update on COVID had 1.7 lakh users globally. The next thing we now created in partnership with the Critical Care Society of India is a ventilator training project. And this actually, one of the secretaries in the central government asked me to put this together. And so we did the content. We did a fantastic simulator, which we did in partnership with an international group who had a simulator. Then we did a one-on-one connect using the Critical Care Society and a new learner. So that today you can buy ventilators, but how do you buy expertise overnight? And so now we're using technology to train people in how to get up to speed on ventilator use and how to do mentorship. Because if a doctor is over 60 years old, he's probably staying at home and not coming in. But he can stay at home and mentor a young person who's using the ventilator and getting up to speed on it. So these kinds of partnerships also are happening.
Right. I'm going to come to a question on infodemics, and because that's something that we fight a lot. Another question on people at the front lines, the doctors, the ventilator care experts or nurses. I mean, all of them need to stay motivated and driven at this time, more so than anyone else perhaps in this country at this time. How are you as a large chain of hospitals ensuring that, and do you see any challenges there too?
See, I think in the early days, there was this initial fear of, how and where, and people had seen these scary images from Italy and, heard the numbers of the medical workers. I think we went about it, one is that we said it's voluntary. Those who want to come, please come forward. Second is we assured them that we would do whatever we could in our capability to keep them safe. So we invested in proper separate rooms. So we never put number of patients in a big general ward. We created the rooms, we created the negative pressure, we bought the right PPEs, we gave them the training on how to wear them, and then we never overworked them. So we did a staffing, we cut the shift, and we quarantined them separately so that they were not, mixing with other staff. So if a nurse is working in a COVID ward, she will not meet a nurse who's in a non-COVID hospital of ours till the period where she's working or the 14 days of quarantine. So once we put down all these protocols, and honestly, it's not this thing. I went personally, I wore the mask and everything and went into the COVID ward to greet our teams and tell them that we are with you and we appreciate, the kind of risk they're taking. And by God's grace, so far, the number of staff have been very proactive. They are safe. And we've been able to, really care for a lot of people.
Right. And last question, the infodemic, people, the misinformation, the false news around COVID-19, which causes cascading problems for everyone, including the medical community. Any thoughts on how we can fight this battle better?
So it is multidimensional. Number one, my first request is to society or individuals, because everybody's getting lots of information and just passing it around. And I know they're doing it with very good intent. So the request is to, find a credible source of information, whether it's, a doctor, a hospital, a medical group, and use that as your source. And then there's so many doctors now doing free consults. So verify your knowledge before you pass it on. And if you verified your knowledge and then passed on good stuff, you're doing a public service. But if you're creating an inappropriate fear, then it's actually a disservice. So I think it's public to be more informed about what to do and how to do it. And we're happy to give appropriate, credible information. And I must also say that our own knowledge is changing and updating every day. So we have a weekly update with API, which is the American Association of Physicians of Indian Origin. Our own doctors group are talking with their colleagues. Then we are evolving the Apollo protocol. So first we did, protocol for doctors and care guidelines. And we keep updating that because first it was hydrochloroquine, then it was remdesivir, then it's heparin, and then it's, the combined treatment regime. So we're bringing out our own bulletins for doctors, for factories and industries, for lay public. So we have these separate protocols. Today, we just started talking about a separate protocol for children. I mean, the conversation was that children are protected. And now we're seeing the Kawasaki syndrome in children in New York. So quickly, our pediatricians got together and said, how do we update? Should we do anything different for our people? So it's a proactive, continuous exchange of knowledge, which is credible, which is validated. And it right now, because the extent of validity, we don't have the luxury of large clinical trials. So it is best intent and a lot of reading and research, which is going on continuously.
Right, Sangeeta Reddy, thank you very much for sharing your thoughts, being with us. And I wish you and your team all the very best in this battle that unfortunately promises to be a long and arduous one.
Absolutely. And thank you so much, Govind. I appreciate your pursuit of credible information and the right way to take care of your viewers. And all the very best. All of you stay safe and take care. Namaste.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.